17 children vanished during a 1982 mountain scouting trip. Tents ripped open. No tracks, no screams. The campfire was still burning. Breakfast plates were untouched. Watches left behind all stopped at 2:14 a.m. last week, every single. One of them walked out of the same woods, shoes clean, clothes unstained, asking why no one came to pick them up. One boy clutched a map none of the leaders remembered handing out. It was drawn in charcoal. The trees were numbered. And beneath the roots of tree 19 was their own names already crossed out. Check your backyard. What number is carved in? The bark? He hadn't spoken aloud on the drive. The road to Camp Echo wasn't marked anymore. His GPS spun in place, and the wooden sign long since fallen lay half buried in moss. The gate creaked open without resistance. Beyond it, the trees seemed too tall, as if they had grown while waiting. But he knew better. The trees didn't grow anymore. They remembered. David Weiler left the car idling at the edge of the gravel path. A trail of fog followed him as he stepped out, breath fogging the glass as he passed the rear view. When he looked, again, there were two clouds, his and another, slower to fade. The mess hall had sagged into itself. The roof bowed like it remembered too many winters. He stepped inside carefully, his flashlight cutting through the moldy dark. The walls were blistered with water damage and time, and still, it smelled like pine soap. Like camp inspection mornings, like boys lined up for roll call, his boots echoed. Too loud. As if no sound had touched these walls in decades. But someone had been here. A new lock on the archive cabinet. A fresh scrape on the linoleum where something heavy had been moved. On the window, a child's handprint, left in ash dye. He found the old attendance sheet on the corkboard, faded but intact. July 10th to 17th, 1982. Unit Echo. 17 names. One underlined dot his dot, but he hadn't been part of Unit Echo. He was a junior counselor that year, assigned to Unit Delta. He remembered that. His file should have been in the archive room, with the others. But when he pried the drawer open, index cards flipped past blank pages. His tab was still there. No record behind it. A hollow breath pushed through him. He unlocked the cassette player. It was still right where he left it, tucked beneath the office desk, wrapped in a hymnal torn from the camp chapel. He seized the Sparrowfall, written in crayon on the inside cover. His fingers paused over the tape inside. Labeled in block letters, Echo Night 4. He pressed play. For 7 seconds. Nothing. Then, dragging. A sound like canvas being pulled over gravel. A wet breath. Something knocking wood. Then something closer, the mic brushing against fabric. Then, faintly, almost buried in hiss. Don't turn around yet. He stopped the tape. Breath held. The camp bell rang outside. Twice. The bell had been dismantled after the fire in '85. There was no bell tower. He stepped out into the open air, scanning the treetops, eyes stinging from the cold. Nothing but fog. Still, the metal sound of the bell's echo lingered behind his ears, like it had struck inside his head. In the recreation cabin, he found the first shoe, small, dirt-caked, missing its lace. Someone had placed it precisely in the center of the floor, beneath a shattered mirror. He knelt. The glass was cracked in a star pattern, but the reflection showed a year written in fog across the bottom. Edge, 1993. A year the camp had already been condemned. A year he'd stopped returning calls from the inquiry board. He didn't want to keep looking, but his hands moved anyway. The drawers under the mirror were nailed shut, except one. It slid open with a shriek, the sound dry and high-pitched. Inside, a photograph. Burnt at the edges. 17 boys lined up by the fire pit. His own face among them, smiling. But the fire was lit. He had no memory of a group photo at night. He turned the photo over. A single line written in pencil. Only one of us was supposed to stay. He dropped it. his pulse ticking like a watch against bone. He moved toward the infirmary next. Steps soft, like walking through someone else's nightmare. The cot frame still bore numbers on their rails. 1 through 12. 11 mattresses. A child's voice echoed down the hallway. A laugh, then quick shuffling steps. But when he turned the corner, nothing moved. The cold was heavier here, layered. The kind that settled inside the lungs. One cot had its sheet pulled tight. He reached toward it. A faint warmth radiated through the fabric, as if someone had just risen. He pulled it back. A hymnal lay open on the bed. Same one as before, same page. He sees the sparrow fall, but now the music bars were missing. In their place, names. First names, initials, and beside each, a single vertical line. All but one crossed out. A voice behind him said, "You're early." He turned. Nothing there. The cot creaked behind him. Sheet, still warm. He staggered backward, flashlight slicing through the dark. Then he saw at a drawer in the infirmary desk that hadn't existed before. A hairline crack around the wood, pulsing slightly in the beam. He opened it, inside. Scarf, red, folded too neatly. The tag stitched inside read, "Property of Unit Echo. Return to David W." His throat closed. His middle initial was R. He backed out of the infirmary, into the hallway. The walls suddenly closer, like they'd shifted inward. He reached for his tape recorder, trembling, desperate to anchor time again. The tape inside had rewound itself. No hiss now. Just one voice, his own. "I told them I wouldn't forget." Then, dragging, slow, in the hall behind him, he didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. The exits wouldn't open if they weren't ready. Back in the archive room, he knelt, forcing open the sealed evidence drawer. The bag inside was labeled. Unopened. The handwriting looked like his. Inside, the red scarf. Still warm, but this one had no tag. And when he turned to leave, the window pane was fogged again. 2 breath clouds. One heartbeat behind his own. And somewhere outside, the bell rang for a 3rd time. But no one had pulled the rope. The envelope had no return address. Only a hand-drawn spiral in red wax where the seal should have been. It arrived folded into itself, creased in unnatural places, the paper already softer on the edges like it had been held too long by too many hands. David didn't open it immediately. He stared at the wax. Something had pressed it from the inside, not the outside. You could see the uneven bulge like a child's finger had tried to push back through. He lit the overhead in the office, though it buzzed and dimmed in protest. The camp's records had been relocated, but this one corner still held the archive drawers. 2 had already warped shut. One was padlocked with no key. He opened the envelope. Inside, a bundle of charcoal rubbings on thin tracing paper, each labeled by hand in block letters. Tree 4, Tree 11, Tree 19. The last was circled not in pen, but with something waxy, crayon, red, thick, uneven strokes, pressed hard enough to indent the sheet beneath. The paper should have felt brittle, but it didn't. It felt damp. Still. Soft. Too fresh. He unfolded the rubbing labeled Tree 19. Across the bark's imprint were names, scratched deep into the trunk, 17 lines, each in a different hand. Some cursive, some block letters, a few barely legible. Beside each, a single cross mark. He blinked, slowly. He counted 17. He remembered 15. He read through the names one by one. His pulse slowed halfway through, then sped again. His was the last. David bubbled. He hadn't carved it. He would have. Remembered, wouldn't he? His name was crossed out like the others, but not cleanly. Someone had tried to scratch over it, then re-etch it again. The line broke midway, a hesitation. Like the knife had paused, waiting for something to change. Papers smelled like ash. He pushed back from the desk, reached for the camp's incident log, what remained of it. Most pages were blank or water damaged beyond legibility. A few had names redacted in thick black ink. But someone had missed a line. Unit Echo, July 13, 1982. Evacuation order issued. 2 not accounted for. 2. He remembered one Matthew Keller, the boy who never came back from the forest perimeter. Check. So who was the second? The reflection of the drawer caught his eye. It was slightly ajar. He hadn't opened it. He approached slowly. A handprint had appeared on the wood, damp, small, left in some kind of soot or dust. 5 fingers, slightly spread, like someone reaching up from beneath the desk. He opened the drawer fully. Inside, a burnt photo. The same group of boys by the fire pit, only this version was wrong. The arrangement of the kids had shifted. One boy stood alone, off to the side, facing away. His head was bowed, arms limp. The name on his shirt was smudged. The fire was higher than in the original photo he found last night. 2 high. Behind them, in the tree line, a figure. Blurry. Not a counselor. Not a camper. 2 tall. He turned. Photo over. Nothing written this time. But the paper trembled slightly, as if it were breathing. He looked up. The office door had cracked open, just slightly. Light spilled into the dark hallway beyond. But the bulb flickered above it, casting a slow pulse of light and shadow. Light and shadow, like a heartbeat too far from its chest. David gathered the rubbings into a file. He made his way out of the office, through the hallway lined with filing. Cabinets no one dared empty. Dust crawled up the corners, and the wallpaper had started peeling into long strips. One curled downward in the shape of a spiral. He turned left instead of right toward the old chapel. The chapel wasn't marked on the current floor plan. It had been converted in the 90s, renamed the Reflection Room, and later condemned for structural weakness. But David remembered. The pews, the songs, the locked hymn drawer behind the pulpit. He stepped inside. The air was heavier here, like stone that hadn't exhaled in years. A cracked mirror stood near the back wall, once used for posture checks and uniform inspections. It now leaned against the altar at an angle. Its surface was FOGED. He approached slowly. The temperature dropped near it. His breath came out faintly, 1 cloud. Then 2. The second breath appeared before his own. Then vanished. He stared at himself. Then at the corner of the mirror, a date had begun forming. Condensation blooming in jagged numbers. 1986. He hadn't been here in 86. The cap had already shut down by then. He reached for the mirror, but it trembled beneath his hand. The floorboards groaned. From the altar drawer, something rattled. He opened it. Inside, a hymn torn from the book. Just the chorus. No melody lines, only lyrics. He counts the names upon the tree. 1 for sorrow, 2 for plea, 3 for those who stayed behind, 4 for those not meant to find. The rest had been scratched out with graphite. Deep gouges in the page. A fingernail clung to the corner. He closed the drawer. On the way out, he passed the wall where the children's height had once been marked in pencil. Someone had sanded the wall smooth. But beneath the fluorescent glare, he could see them re-emerging. 1 by 1, thin, faded lines, each with a name beside it. 17 again, but one stood apart, lower to the ground. Dated incorrectly 1981, but beneath a name that hadn't arrived until 82. He touched the wall. The paint gave slightly, like skin. He pressed harder. Behind the drywall, something shifted. Paper. He heard the quiet rasp of it falling. Back in the office, he retrieved the crowbar from the utility closet. He returned. Dug the edge beneath the panel. Peeled. A single folder slid out of the space. Behind the wall. Yellowed. Sealed with string. He opened it. Inside, an incident transcript. Interview style. Counselors. Notes on post-disappearance behavior. He scanned the pages, then stopped. Patient refers to others as echoes. Claims no memory of days 3 to 7. mentions a different voice speaking through the scoutmaster during chapel hymns. Last session quote, "We didn't want to come back." The voice on the final line was different. Smaller handwriting. Rush. Same phrase. Again. We didn't want to come back. He looked back at the charcoal rubbings. Tree 19. Circled. Red wax. From the inside of the envelope. He reached for the tape recorder. It had powered itself on again. Tape inside spun. Dragging. Breath. Then, "We didn't want to come back." But he called roll anyway. The mirror behind him hadn't fogged. But his name was now etched faintly in the bottom edge, and just beside it, half visible in the grain of the glass, was his second reflection. Not his. Just watching. The lights in the interview room buzzed slow, arrhythmic. Fluorescent hum like breath held too long. The boys sat in a line, not blinking. Not one of them asked for water. Detective Lore stood just outside the two-way mirror, notepad forgotten in her hand. Her fingertips kept brushing the glass, as if expecting it to fog. As if someone else should be breathing against it. Inside, the boy they were calling Timothy held a blue pen like it didn't quite belong to his fingers. His skin was clean, too clean. He hadn't dirtied under his nails. His knees weren't scratched, but the dental records matched. He even had the scar on his temple from the 1979 bicycle fall. His mother had cried seeing it, except his voice broke wrong when he spoke, like it was learning tone, like it was borrowing the rhythm of how boys used to talk. He had been missing for 43 years. Timothy drew a spiral on the table, over and over again, not tight, wide and slow, not fast like a nervous child, intentional. And with each loop, the point dug in deeper, until the pen cracked in his hand and black ink bled down his palm like a thread. He didn't react. 3 chairs down, another boy whispered, "He's tracing it again." A voice nearly identical to Timothy's, and another boy smiled without turning his head, speaking the same sentence in sync. "He's tracing it again." Laura stepped back. "I want the files from 79, she said to the intern behind her. "Everything from Camp Ashfall. Everything with Unit Echo." The intern blinked. "Man, there's no Unit Echo on record. Check again." One of them's wearing the badge. They watched from the other side of the glass as Timothy reached into his shirt collar. A rusted pin emerged, old brass. A triangle with a circle through it, and a word etched so shallow it looked scratched out. "Echo." Laura moved to the hallway, fingers shaking as she dialed. She didn't know why she needed to call her father. He hadn't worked for the camp. He hadn't even known these children. But when she got his voice, all she said was, "You told me there were only 4 boys." He went silent. Then a click. Then nothing. Inside the interview room, the boys had not moved. One was humming something. Laura recognized it. Her mother used to sing it while cleaning, before she forgot her own name. "If I should die before I wake." Another spiral. Another cracked pen. Another identical hum. She walked fast. She didn't run. Not yet. In the archive basement, the lights flickered once and didn't come back. She opened the metal filing drawer marked 1979. It slid too far. Like something pulled it. Inside, a hymn page was wedged between the reports. Old paper, torn from the center. The melody was hand-marked with dissonant sharps. Laura turned it over. On the back, a list of names. 9 crossed out. 2 overwritten. 1 repeated 3 times. Timothy Fenn. She froze. The second drawer was labeled floor plans. It contained only blueprints of buildings that didn't exist anymore. But on the team's back of the second blueprint, in smeared red pencil, there was never a floor 3. She stared at the ceiling. This room was supposed to be beneath the main floor, below security. There shouldn't be a 3rd floor below this. Something shifted behind her, not footsteps. A drawer, sliding shut on its own. When she turned, a new drawer had appeared. Number. Label, No handle. The metal had no seams. She backed away, slow, and ran her hand along the wall. It wasn't metal. It felt like wood, painted over. A door, but the corridor had no exits. No plans showed it. She didn't open it. Not yet. She returned upstairs, where a therapist had been brought in, state mandated. He sat across from Timothy, gently asking, "Do you remember your mother's name?" Timothy shook his head. "But I remember her teeth." The therapist blinked. "Her teeth?" She screamed in the woods. Her teeth came out when she did. The boy next to him repeated the sentence, word for word, and then smiled. The therapist made a note. "And how long were you out there, Timothy?" "A day." Therapist, "And what happened at night?" Timothy didn't answer, but his gaze shifted to the mirror, not at it, into it. As if seeing something reflected that no one else could. That's when the humming started again. Low, one voice first, then layered. A dissonant child's harmony. The kind a choir might hum to test acoustics. And in the mirror, Laura saw it, breath. On the glass. Not from the boys. From the inside of the reflection. She touched the mirror. Cold. No. Fog from her side. Timothy stood, walked calmly to the table, picked up the cracked pen again. "Did you know you had a twin?" he asked the therapist. Therapist shook his head. "I don't." "You used to," Timothy said. He went behind the wall. The pen snapped in half again, this time without touching anything. Outside, Laura's intern returned, pale and breathless. "There's a problem with the tapes." "What tapes?" "From the missing persons interviews. They're looped. They all end on the same frame." He held up a monitor screen. The paused image showed one of the boys' mouth open, finger raised, and behind him on the wall, a handprint that hadn't been there in the last frame. Laura stared at it. The print was upside down, small, almost like a child's. She whispered, "Reverse the footage." He did. Played it backward. The boy moved in reverse. The finger dropped. The mouth closed. The handprint remained. "It didn't move with the footage," he said. "Because it's not in the footage," she said. "It's in the room." They turned slowly. The mirror was clear now. The boys inside had stopped humming. All were looking directly at her. Then, "Where did the girl go?" asked Timothy. "There was no girl," the therapist replied. "She's the one who sings." Another boy whispered. From the ceiling vent came the faintest sound. A voice, off-key, female, singing the same line from the hymn, "If I should die." "Before I wake." They searched the building, every floor, but not the basement. Laura didn't let them. She filed a false alarm. She told the others it was faulty wiring. That night, she returned alone. She opened the unlabeled drawer. Inside, a mirror, not resting, built into the wall, edged with old screws. It reflected only part of her. The year in the corner read 2026. It was still 2025, and her hair in the reflection was streaked white. She touched the glass. Her reflection smiled a second too late. She staggered back. The room beyond it was visible for a breath. A corridor of shoes nailed to the walls, child-sized, all pointing upward. And in the center, a burnt photo, half melted. It showed a group of boys in uniform. Unit Echo. The year, 1979. But someone had scratched a girl into the photo. You could tell by the eyes they were drawn too dark, too deep. The next morning, Timothy was gone. So were the other boys. Not escaped unrecorded, files overwritten. Security tape showed static. And in the therapist's notes, only one entry remained. Patient refused mirror. Claims his reflection speaks out of sync. Laura stared at the empty room. On the table, where Timothy had sat, a spiral still etched into the wood, and under it, scratched so lightly she almost missed it. "She sings before the next one comes." She looked up. The mirror was breathing, and it had learned her face. There had never been A lock on the supply room door. Not until this morning, when Ethan found a brass padlock warm to the touch and a splintered note stapled to the frame. Do not replace calendar. The letters were crooked, hand-scrawled, and bleeding through from the back. When he turned the page anyway, the paper stuck. August 11th ended on a Wednesday. August 12th was gone. Glued shut. As if the day had been erased, not missed, not blank, but covered up. And yet, the scout journal on his desk said otherwise. He hadn't touched that notebook in 40 years. Shouldn't have. But it was open, the spine loose, the ink fresh, his own looping signature at the bottom of a page. He had no memory of writing. Lead hike toward Echo Valley. Light rain, one boy missing boot. Reached clearing 2:14 p.m. Turned back after count showed 16. 16. Not 17. But Ethan remembered none of it. Not the hike, not the rain. Not even the valley. He tore out the page and ran a thumbnail over the ink, still wet enough to smudge. Not old, not archival. This was now. A thud sounded behind him. A drawer slid open on its own, the one that shouldn't be there. He'd searched this desk before. Drawers on the left, never the right. But now one jutted out beneath the metal typewriter tray, trembling slightly, as if it had just been released from something unseen. Inside, a photograph, half burned, curled at the edges. Boys around a campfire, 17 shadows. 18 faces. No names, no date, no signature. But he knew that fire. And he knew he'd taken it. He felt his lungs close in when he looked again. A child's shoe sat on top of the drawer, dustless, new, tongue still curled, like it had just been pulled off. He didn't remember walking to the basement, but the sound was there again, soft humming behind the boiler room wall, like a hymn. No language, just the breath of it. The kind sung in chapels with wet floors and no windows. August 12th didn't happen. He repeated it like a prayer as he descended. The stairwell smelled of hot dust and rotted wood, as if something beneath the concrete had been trying to exhale. The calendar page curled in his pocket, stained with glue. The hymn grew louder the deeper he went, and by the time he reached the sub-basement marked records to be closed, the sound had stopped pretending to be a song. It was breathing. Fast, childlike, ragged, like someone had been running in circles. For hours, the lights flickered. There were no real blueprints of this floor. The 1982 floor plan stopped at level 1A. Everything beneath had been verbally redacted. Storage, pipework, obsolete, they'd said. But Ethan had always wondered why the key to 2B was kept in a drawer labeled Return to Echo. Inside the records room, the air bent, not from heat. Not cold either. Just wrong. Shelves leaned where the wall didn't. A mirror leaned on the far side, cracked vertically, its reflection hazed not by dust, but by age. Ethan approached. He was not in it. Instead, a hallway that didn't exist stretched behind him in the glass. Fluorescent lights. A door labeled Med Obs 1983. His breath fogged the mirror. He stepped back. Behind him, nothing. Just the boiler, the shelves, and another drawer. Embedded directly into the concrete wall, rusted at the edges. Not possible. Not built. He pressed his palm to the handle. It opened with a sound like bones, dragging through water. Inside, 17 photographs. Same children. Same fire. Same circle, each one taken a second later. The shadows moved. Eyes shifted. One boy was closer to the camera in each frame, as if he were approaching the lens over time. Mouth open, like he was mid-sentence. In the last photo, the boy's lips were nearly touching the lens, written in charcoal on the back, "Don't tell him you remember." He tried to return to the office, but the hallway changed. The lights were too clean. The posters weren't faded. There were whistles on the hooks, tags that hadn't yellowed. A hymn page was folded in the window frame, same as the one torn. From the chapel hymnal in 1982. He remembered that, at least. The melody had no lyrics. Just numbers where words should have been, but this one was different. In place of the time. Signature, 2:14, the exact time the journal entry said they turned. Back. He turned. A boy stood at the end of the hallway, hair damp. Shirt tucked, one shoe missing, not scared. Just watching. Ethan blinked, and the boy was closer. He looked 12. But the calendar said it had been 43 years. The boy held something in his hand. A mirror shard. He lifted it, tilted it toward Ethan. In the reflection, Ethan wasn't alone. A man stood behind him, older, lean, wearing the same camp leader's jacket Ethan had lost decades ago. Holding a whistle. But Ethan couldn't turn around, couldn't speak. The mirror shimmered and went dark. He reached the chapel by mistake. The doors were open, dustless. The pews had hymn books again. He hadn't been inside since the boy went missing. Not the boy who vanished in the woods, the other one. The one who kept saying he saw someone draw circles around the tents the night before the hike. Said it wasn't a man. Said it was Ethan. That child's name had been removed from all rosters. But Ethan remembered the accusation. You kept leading. U.S. back, even when the compass spun. Inside the chapel, the carpet was wrong. New. The hymnal page from the hallway was folded into the Bible at the pulpit. Inside it, a list, a circle drawn in charcoal, 17 names. One scratched out, below. The list, a note in Ethan's own handwriting. There were never supposed to be 18. His legs gave out. The stained glass window behind the altar had changed. No saints, just a reflection. The chapel, but empty. No pews, no books, no light. A boy moved through the frame, dragging a shoe behind him. Ethan turned away, in the counselor's bunk. The mirror finally cracked. He watched it break. Hairline at first, then widening like something was pulling from the inside. He backed up, but the mirror didn't fall, just separated. From inside came a breath. Short, hollow, waiting. He didn't check the drawers anymore. Just turned toward the window. But even the trees outside looked wrong. Too still. Too close. Like someone had painted them on glass and pressed it against the frame. He sat. He whispered the name of the boy who vanished. The one they scratched from the records. The one who told him, quietly, don't turn around when they count you. That's when they replace you. The lights dimmed. He remembered the hike now. Remembered turning around. Remembered hearing a second whistle, when his own was still in his mouth. They hadn't been alone in those woods, and he'd led them into the clearing. Anyway, the photograph was on the floor when he looked again. Campfire lit. 17 shadows. 18 sets of eyes, one looking back from inside the fire. The calendar still ends at August 11th. But tonight, the firewood is already stacked. The blueprints lied. Cal knelt on the cracked linoleum in the mess hall. The map unfolded like a patient on an autopsy table. In the corner, red ink marked sublevel access removed, -1969. The paper smelled like a filing cabinet sealed too long, and his fingertips smudged decades of graphite, dust, and something that felt like dried sap, or maybe blood. He wouldn't ask. The smell was back again. A moist metallic whisper that always came before the memory did. The others in the restoration team pretended they didn't smell it. But Cal had stopped pretending things a long time ago. He was the only one who remembered the stairs. He rose and walked past the rows of overturned tables, stripped of their varnish and color. Everything here was leached. Time had sucked the red from the curtains, the names from the sign-in sheet, the music from the record player still bolted to the shelf. But beneath it all, something had waited, concrete, wet, silent. At the back of the mess hall, hidden behind a pegboard of old ladles and aprons, he found it again, the door that didn't exist on the plans. Warped wood, swollen. In its frame, Padlock rusted through like something had chewed it from the inside. Cal lifted the hook, no resistance. As if the door wanted to open, now it creaked. Not the theatrical kind, but something tired, exhaled, like a sigh from a mouth too long shut. Behind it, stairs. 30-2 of them. He counted aloud this time. One for each minute past midnight, the night they all woke to screaming. He'd been 13. He remembered the whistle. Not the sound, but the silence after. The way the trees stopped. The way even his breath had felt like a betrayal. They said it was a bobcat. Then later, that it had been a nightmare. A counselor misunderstanding his medication. But Cal had found the shoe small, canvas, laced wrong, toes black with frost. That child was never named. No incident was logged. Now as he descended, the cold returned. Not winter. Institution cold. Floor drain cold. A chill that remembered punishment. Step 20, the air changed. Cal paused. Ran his hand along the wall. Moisture, or sweat, there shouldn't have been anything. The blueprints showed dirt. No infrastructure, no footing, but he kept descending. Until the wall to his right broke away and became an opening. A chamber, square, too perfectly measured to be accidental. Inside. Metal chairs stacked in a corner. 2 chalkboards, one shattered. A hymn sheet nailed to the wall, the bottom half torn away. Cal stared. He knew this hymn. They sang it after lights out. Not at chapel. Not during meals. But when someone was sent below. The room had no dust. Just breath. His own, and then another. Condensation bloomed for a second across the cracked mirror. Bolted to the wall. He turned. No one. But the mirror showed a boy sitting in one of the chairs. Knees together, arms folded tight like he was bracing for something. The boy's face was blurred. But the shirt was unmistakable. Camp Echo, Junior Scout Division, 1982. Cal stepped closer. The mirror didn't reflect him, only the boy. He blinked, and the boy mouthed something. "Return me." It wasn't a voice. It was a memory, crawling backward up his spine. A drawer behind him creaked open. He hadn't touched it. Inside, a burnt photograph. 4 children on a hill. Cal was one of them. The others. He couldn't name. But he knew the hill. It wasn't here. It was where they made them dig. In silence. With toy shovels, each time. A whistle blew. One child was taken away. He backed away from the drawer. Turned. The chairs had changed. They now faced the wall, and the wall was bleeding light through a hairline crack. A white, sterile light, like an observation room. But there was no one inside. Just a wall of Polaroids taped across the glass. Each photo had one thing in common. A counselor's uniform hung on nail. Sometimes the wall behind it was red, sometimes black, sometimes dirt. Cal stepped closer to the crack. Looked through. He saw his own bunk, as it looked that night, sheets still messy. The hymnal open to the missing page, and a handprint on the window above it. That wasn't there before. He moved back. The whistle blew. Not loud, soft, faint, like it had crossed too much time to get here. He dropped the photo. Under the stairs where the concrete had rotted, a space yawned open. He reached in. His fingers closed around something fabric. He pulled out a camp counselor's uniform. It was dry, clean, folded. Except for the name tag. It was still wet. The stitching read, "Return me." She stopped drawing at 11. Before that, every page was a room. Rooms with 4 walls, 1 window, 1 drawer. No beds, no doors. Just wallpaper. Always curling at the edge. Like it was listening. Dr. Halden read the pages slowly, afraid to touch them for too long, afraid they'd remember. The sketchbook had no name. Only the spine. E. Gable Clinic, 1969. A child's initials were redacted in black marker, the kind that bleeds through if you press hard enough. And someone had pressed very hard. The girl had never spoken to anyone, not in real sentences, just chalk lines and paper sighs. Her records listed 26 sessions, 26 different drawings of the same room. The colors changed, the angles warped, but the bones stayed. Window on the left wall, a single drawer under it, always locked, and always a crack in the glass. Same shape every time. A spiral, barely visible, like breath trying to escape. They remember different colors. Halden whispered, laying the pages side by side on the linoleum floor of Archive 3-green walls. Then blue, then beige, then some color that didn't have a name, like wet dust, one boy had written. If dust had skin. He pulled out the accompanying file, F1173, one of the lost twins, no longer listed in the census. Notes from the final session read, child claims drawer rattled during session. Therapist heard nothing. Another child patient R insisted the drawer opened when the lights flickered. No one else saw it open, but every child drew the same. Mirror inside, oblong, hairline cracked, frame scorched at one edge like it had been pulled from a fire. The crack was always on the left. A single curve. A therapist once tried to flip the sketchbook page around, said it was a mistake. That child didn't return the next week. Wasn't it the color of hymn paper? Asked the intern. Her voice echoed in the silence. She was new. Didn't know not to speak in Archive 3. Halden didn't answer. He had found a torn hymn page tucked between two drawings. Faint notation still visible. Whither shall I flee? The date scribbled in pencil. February 1903. The song hadn't been used in any chapel since the fire. He took a breath. The temperature dropped slightly. Not from spirits, but from insulation or the lack of it. The file room had no heating duct. No. Blueprint said it should exist. He continued flipping. One child drew the drawer slightly ajar. Inside, a single handprint on the mirror's surface. But the reflection didn't show the child. It showed a girl standing further back. One they said didn't exist. Another sketch showed that same girl. Older, hair parted differently. Same face, same cracked mirror. A different drawer, this one deeper. Too deep for the dimensions. Too deep for any room to allow. The girl, with the parted hair, had never been a patient, but she appeared in 5 unrelated sketchbooks, and in the background of a damaged photograph found under floor 2's tiles. Children posed after a storm drill. Everyone looking straight at the camera, except one child, blurred at the edge, looking sideways into something else. Her hand against a window that wasn't there. Behind her, wallpaper peeling in a spiral. Halden exhaled. The intern's voice returned, quiet now. What's under the wallpaper? He didn't answer. He reached for the last page of the sketchbook, but it had already been torn out. Just a curl of red remained, ink maybe, or blood. Dry. FLAKE det. It outlined a shape, not a face. Not a body, a clock hand. The second one, the minute hand, had appeared in Patient B's folder. Drawn on a napkin. Slipped under a door, no one numbered opening. Its tip had pointed at 3. This one pointed backward. At 11, time doesn't rewind in hospitals, unless it never moved. Halden stood. Lights flickered once, then again. A drawer behind him clicked. There should be no drawer there. He turned slowly. There it was. Half open. Dustless. Inside. A mirror. No reflection. Only the spiral. The intern was no longer beside him. Just a hymn page where she stood, edges warm. He reached for it. His hand blurred in the glass beside it. Not his reflection. Her, the parted hair. Older now, waiting. He closed the sketchbook. The hymn burned in his hand, then disappeared. On the spine, a new date had appeared, 2027. He hadn't written it. On the inside cover, a name now unredacted, his own. None of them remember what they saw, but all of them draw the room before it builds itself. Always. The wallpaper begins to curl. He only went into the map room because the bell rang too early. 3 minutes before the end of free study. A single chime broke through the west wing, sharp, unsanctioned. The other children froze, necks twitching. Like pigeons. No one moved until a staff member arrived and whispered that they could return to their rooms. That's how he ended up alone in the map room, clutching the black roll of charcoal he'd stolen from art therapy. It was colder in here than yesterday. Colder than it should be in July. The map still filled the entire wall. An old military survey with the local terrain skinned across canvas, thick with thumbtack scars and pinholes, white correction tape slashing across old place names. His Group C, had been told the area south of tree line 17 was closed off due to erosion. But the tape there was newer than the rest. Fresh, a little curled at the edge. He stepped closer, charcoal smudging his palm. The room had no windows, but something made the map shudder faintly, as if a draft moved underneath. He exhaled. And the charcoal lifted. Not off the table, off the map. Dust stirred on the surface and began to collect near the bottom, where the forgotten trail split west. His breath hadn't touched it. And yet, the soot floated up, congregating like ash over tree 19. He didn't remember a tree 19. He stepped closer. A faint black shape emerged. A fingerprint. Not his. Smaller. More oval. The charcoal halo drifted around it like it had found home. The map made a soft crinkling sound, like breath under plastic. And then, another sound, mechanical, clicking. He turned. A tape recorder sat behind him on the shelf. He hadn't noticed it before. It was one of the brown models with the split-level reels, like from the media. Room, but older. Dust on the microphone. But the tape spun. He hadn't pressed play. A child's voice came through, crackling. Genderless, measured, like reciting something memorized too long. Subject, cabin echo, subgroup delta, coordinates. Verified. Then, name, first, middle, last. Age, 12, entry day, Monday. His full name, his birthday. Not spoken by him. The voice clicked. There was a pause. Then, you promised. He didn't remember promising anything. The map rippled. He stepped back, heart thudding. There was no vent, no window, no air movement. But the entire southern section of the canvas bulged slightly, as if something was shifting underneath. Beneath the fingerprint, the ink ran slightly. A black dot bled into the tree line, then another. Footsteps? No, fingerprints, smudges moving north. The tape clicked again. Day 19. No external breach, no memory deviation logged. He hadn't spoken, but the voice seemed to know his thoughts or mimic them. It began to say numbers now. Sequence. Codes. Names he didn't recognize. And then quieter. It's not a map, it's a promise. We record where you leave us. The bulb above him flickered. He backed toward the door, hand on the knob. But it wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked. It just refused. Like something behind the frame pulled back each time he tried. He let go. The room exhaled. In the corner, a drawer opened by itself. It was one of the lower filing cabinets, rusted. Sealed last he checked, but it had been pried or split. Inside, a burnt photograph. He pulled it out. Half of it was gone. The rest showed a boy with his back turned, facing the map wall. But the detail that stopped him wasn't the boy. It was the calendar hanging in the background. The date read, July 1973. That was 52 years ago. The boy wore his same haircut. Same socks. Same posture. He dropped the photo. Ash flaked from the edges, and on the floor beside it, a child's shoe. The laces knotted unnaturally tight, as if tied by someone else. He hadn't seen it earlier, but now it was at his feet. Left shoe only. The brand had been discontinued before he was born. You promised, the voice repeated. He ran to the shelf, pressed stop on the recorder dot. It didn't stop. The reels kept spinning. The voice kept going. We buried time. You dug it back up. He slapped the lid open. No tape inside. The breath fogged in front of him, not his. He turned dot in the glass panel of the supply cabinet. A reflection, not behind him. Not next to him, but inside the cabinet, a boy standing where no floor was. His hair was wet. His mouth moved but made no sound. He reached toward the glass, but instead of touching it, he watched the reflection smear, a handprint, from the inside dot. Then the tape changed pitch, slowed, as if melting. I remember what you drew. I remember what you buried. His hands shook. The charcoal from earlier, it wasn't in his pocket anymore. But it had returned to the map. A spiral shape now marked Tree 19, 3 dots inside, like a child's attempt at a face. He heard it. Again, you promised. The door finally opened behind him. Light poured in. A staff member stood there, clipboard, neutral expression. She didn't blink. You're late, she said. Free time is over. He turned back to the room. The map was blank again. The recorder was gone. So was the drawer. And the child's shoe. Only the photograph remained, now full. The boy faced the camera. Same haircut. Same socks. But behind him, pinned to the map, was a hymn page. Torn from a chapel book. He couldn't read the lyrics, but his own name was written in the margin. And in the lower corner. Mirror that reflected a year that hadn't happened. He didn't take the photo, but when he reached into his pocket, it was there. The door closed. The room was empty, but the recorder, buried somewhere in the wall, kept playing, on loop. Buried time. You dug it back up. The file smelled like rotted paper and warm hands. It wasn't cold in the archive, but he shivered when he touched it. The folder had a faint dampness, like breath held too long. There were no lights left overhead, only the occasional flicker from the inspection lamp. That's what the janitor called it, though he couldn't remember seeing any janitor here. The court file was marked case, echo, then scratched out with a single blade line. Beneath it, closed, 1981. He was born in 1982. He sat on the cracked leather bench beside the filing cabinet with the drawer that stuck and the handle that turned on its own. He didn't try to fix it anymore. Inside the folder, the pages had no chronology. 17 names, 17 dates of birth. All in the late 1980s, 1990s, even one in 2004. But the file was sealed decades before those dates existed. The entries weren't typed. They were written in his handwriting. His pen was still in his coat pocket. He stopped when he saw the photograph, burnt at the edges. Half of it bubbled away. But the faces were there. Not children, not exactly, not yet. Their expressions looked wrong, like they knew the picture wasn't meant to happen. One girl wore a scout uniform with a stitched nameplate, Vera, the thread pulled out as if erased. Slowly by a needle dot in the background of the photo, a mirror caught them. But the reflection showed a different scene entirely, a courtroom with benches empty, except for one man seated alone. He stared back from the glass, older than anyone in the photo, older than the room, himself. A note in the margins read, in smaller, tighter ink, none of them knew they were dead. There was a hum from under the bench. Not from the drawer, beneath, like a light bulb heating up beneath the floorboards. He pressed his hand to the cracked tile and felt something pulsing. A child's shoe was jammed into that below the cabinet, brittle with mold. Inside the shoe, a torn hymn, the edges curled like burned leaves. He didn't recognize the tune, but the melody played anyway, looping. Faintly in his right ear only. It made him remember the cat bell. Not from childhood, but from sleep. The bell that rang at the wrong hour. The psychologist's name was redacted. Every mention blacked out. except one signature almost visible in ultraviolet ink, just beneath the burn mark on the paper corner. He could make out only the first letter, M. He lifted the file and felt something shift in its spine. Not a page, something stitched in. There was a tag hidden between the folder's binding and the back flap, sewn with coarse thread. Echo 0. Heard a cough then, but no one else had come down the stairs. A stack of record logs tipped over as if pushed. The pages didn't fall flat. They stayed mid-air, suspended for a second too long, as if uncertain about gravity. When they hit the floor, every page bore the same black smudge of palm print. Left hand, thumb torn away. He stepped back and hit the cabinet, the one with the handle that turned. It did now slowly, in reverse. Inside that drawer, he saw a court. Transcript, unlabeled. But his own name was there. Defendant, redacted Dobb, July 26, 1982. He never stood trial. Not for anything. The transcript wasn't typed. It was spoken. He flipped through the pages and realized none had been printed. The words were burned into the paper with heat. He touched one and it scorched his fingertip, not with fire, but recognition. We needed them to forget, the page read. A second voice, italicized beneath it. We took their birthdays first. Behind him, the mirror's reflection had changed. It no longer showed him. It showed the file room empty. Then darker. Then something crawling across the ceiling limbs, bent like they'd been reassembled backward. The thing didn't fall from the ceiling, it vanished from it. And the drawer slammed shut. He was still holding the burnt photo. In the corner now, barely visible under curling paper, was a shape he hadn't noticed. A window behind the children. And in the window, a hand, pressed against the glass. He ran, back up the concrete stairs, 3 at a time, lungs burning. But the sound followed, not steps. Just breath. He pushed through the door at the top and entered. The courtroom above, now a shell of itself. Dust, light through cracked doors. The air full of lint that hung like ash. The judge's bench was gone. In its place, a hymn book, open to a page where one line was torn out, cut clean, not ripped. The name stitched into the leather cover, M. Rowell. He stepped forward. The page left in the book read, "Echoes must never speak first." A child's laughter behind the wall. He kicked the bench in front of him. It slid away like it weighed nothing. Beneath it, taped to the wood, was a small sealed envelope. The seal bore the same handwriting as the margins. He opened it. Inside, nothing. Except a stitched tag, Echo 0. He looked up. In the mirror above the judge's bench. His reflection wasn't watching him. It was seated, silent. In the defendant's box. Smiling. The reflection lifted a hand and wrote a date in fog. Across the glass, July 26, 1982. Birthday. The last page in the court file fluttered in his coat pocket. He didn't write it, but it ended with a question. Where do you think you were that day? He returned to the woods without telling anyone. Not even his brother. The van ride had ended differently this time. Not with a parent's relieved hug or a nurse recording names. No one had been waiting at the road when he stepped out. The gravel was empty, the gate rusted shut. The trail had overgrown like the woods had been trying to erase itself since 1984. He climbed the slope alone. The summer air smelled wrong, too warm for July, too still for breathing. He carried a tin lunchbox that hadn't belonged to him. Inside was a photo, burnt around the edges, the faces too melted to name. But the date scrawled in red pen, July 17, 1984. Today. The campfire clearing hadn't changed. The same ring of stones. The same log benches. The same upturned shovel rusted into the roots. But the ashes in the center weren't cold. He knelt beside them, touched the dirt. Still warm, still soft. He sifted through the cinders like looking for proof, but found only shapes, flat patterns in the gray. A jawline, a child's brow, something that looked like a tooth. He closed the box. Then he heard the song, a low, off-key hum, rising behind the trees. Childlike, familiar. It wasn't coming from a throat. It looped too perfectly, like tape, like playback. He turned, but no one was there. And then they were. 18 boys standing in a ring, backs to the fire. None of them blinked. They faced the woods in silence, as if listening to something behind the leaves. He didn't recognize a single one, but their shirts bore the same patch, Camp Echo, same year. Same fraying at the edges. He stepped forward. One boy turned. It wasn't a boy. The face hadn't grown, hadn't aged. But the eyes, those had seen something and never been allowed to forget it. She wore the uniform but not the posture. She looked through him like a mirror trying to lie. Her lips parted. A whisper. Just one word. Again. He backed away, tripping on a log. The fire flared. Ash lifted into the air and scattered. Sparks danced like static across the shadows. The boys remained still. One began to hum. Then another. Then all of them, a discordant echo. The same song that looped before, but wrong now, somehow sung forward and backward at once. He clutched the LUNCHBOX. When he opened it again, the photo had changed. Not the burn. Not the date, but the background. Where trees had once stood, now there was a building brick, cracked with barred windows. A school? A clinic? He couldn't place it, but the word above the door was legible. Observation. He dropped the photo. It hissed against the ashes. Beneath the log where he'd tripped, something metal poked out. A drawer. No hinges. No handle. Just a rectangle in the dirt with one word scratched into it. Echo. His hand shook as he pried it open. Inside, a child's shoe, half buried in soot, and a torn scrap of paper, brittle as bone. Hymnal print. He held it to the fire. Only one line survived. Though we walk not forward, we return. He remembered that line, but not from any church. He'd heard it in the dark. At night, when the walls breathed and the windows blinked and the counselor whispered, "It's not really your bedtime." He had forgotten this place. That's what they told him to do. That's what the papers said. But the shoe, the fire, the word. Observation. He wasn't alone here. The fire crackled louder now, but without heat. Light split through the trees like watching through a broken lens. Shadows jittered. A handprint appeared on the bark beside him, fresh, wet, facing downward like someone had hung upside down. He stared. More ash fell. The girls weren't allowed in this camp, but she had come anyway. She had drawn pictures of places no one remembered. Halls with no exits, chairs with restraints, windows that showed different skies depending on which foot you stood on. Her sketchbook was in his backpack, but he hadn't packed it. She had. He reached into the bag. The book was there, damp, moldering, pages stuck together, but one peeled clean. It showed the campfire, but the faces weren't boys. They were the counselors. Their eyes were stitched shut. Around them, ash fell upward, and in the center she had drawn him. As he looked now, there was something in his hand he hadn't noticed. A mirror shard, small, from the drawer, from the photo. He turned it slowly. The reflection showed the fire, but not the boys. Just one girl, humming, kneeling where he had just stood, holding the same box, wearing his jacket. Watching him, he blinked. She was gone. The fire cracked. Behind him, a drawer. Slammed shut. He turned. The boys were gone. All that remained was the ring of stones, still warm, and a trail of footprints that circled but never led away. He counted them. 18, plus 1. He followed them once. Twice. They never left the ring. Then he looked up. Smoke curled into the branches where no fire reached. On one of the trees, something was nailed, a court document, water-stained and blurred. He stepped closer. The title read, State v. Echo Observation Facility, date, August 4, 1984, but the court record had been sealed. Filed 10 days before the incident, he reached to tear it down. Behind it, a cavity. Hollowed wood. Inside, another photo of him. Standing at the fire. Today, he dropped it. It fell face up. The shadows didn't match. There were more of them in the picture than people around the ring. He turned back toward the trail, but the trail was gone. Just ash now, falling upward, spelling something faint into the night. A handprint on the sky, and then the fire crackled again once, twice, into static. Then a girl's voice, humming something no child should know. It was coming from inside the mirror, and the mirror still showed today. Only not him. Anymore. He had rewound the tape too many times. The static wore through the spool like frostbite at the edge of memory, unraveling in his hands. At first, there was a voice, quiet, stammering, familiar, and then the sound cut just before a scream that never came. He would pause it, close his eyes, and wait to hear what the machine refused to remember. His name was Simon, but the badge on his coat said Martin today. He didn't remember changing it. The ink had bled in the lamination like a fever had passed through the plastic. The date of issue had blurred to gray. Just above the barcode was a photograph, only the edges burnt, as if someone had held a lighter to just his eyes. They looked out, blind and black. He shouldn't have come back alone. The basement hall still reeked of pesticide and old hymnals. Every footstep he took was returned 2 beats later, softer, like the walls waited for silence before mimicking him. The building had been condemned 3 years ago, yet someone had signed his clearance papers yesterday. There was no return address. Simon followed the faint smell of smoke. It curled like memory from a gap in the floorboards beneath a rusted filing cabinet. On top of it, laid deliberately, was a child's shoe too clean for dust, too small for this century. He crouched, breath tight. Inside the shoe, a folded paper scrap. On it, in crayon, just 5 words, "We played here." Not him. He didn't remember who him was. The cabinet drawer opened with a groan like a long breath exhaled from metal lungs. Inside, hymn pages torn, burned and out of order. Their numbers climbed, then fell, then repeated. Hymn 46, hymn 101, hymn 46 again, but with different lyrics. The drawer closed itself when he looked away. Further down the corridor, past the half-collapsed ceiling, was the mirror room. That's what they called it in the older records, before the architecture report redacted the wing entirely. There were no blueprints, no angles. Just a windowless room, 15 by 15, lit by a single low bulb. Simon opened the door. Mirror inside had no frame. Its glass was warped, as if it had melted and then frozen in mid-distortion. Written across it, backwards, in something faintly iridescent, was a phrase he did not want to read aloud. "We still see you." He blinked. For a moment, he saw himself clearly. And behind him, a tree line where there shouldn't be trees. Something leaned just beyond the trunks, shape wrong, colorless. The bulb flickered. He turned around. Nothing there. But the breath on the mirror was still fresh. He stepped closer. The reflection rippled. The year in the corner, etched like a timestamp read. 1993. He had been 12 that year. He remembered the ash on his shirt from the fire. He remembered the girl with the mouth sewn shut who never spoke, but always pointed to the basement. He remembered someone had asked him if he could keep a secret. He had said yes. He had said yes. And the screaming never stopped. Simon stumbled backward into the hallway, heart scissoring. The lights buzzed in protest above. His coat caught a nail in the wall. He yanked it free and noticed the tear-bled cotton like a wound. He made it to the archive room, or what was left of it. The ledgers were gone, pulled from their shelves, and left in a pile, all spines burnt. Every entry had been scratched out except one. A single name, written in red pencil. Sriley. That wasn't his name. But it was the name his grandmother used for him before her stroke. He hadn't heard it since he was 7. He flipped the page. A photograph fell out. It showed the campfire circle from 1993. 8 children, 1 counselor. Trees bending unnaturally. In the background. And in the lower corner, near the logs, another foot, bare, smaller than the others. Partially cropped. He turned the photo over. The back was stamped, Echo 0, archive clearance denied. Then he heard the song humming, low, slow. Tuneless. The way a mouth hums when it's not sure it has lips. He followed it, unwilling, through the bent hallway that hadn't existed 5 minutes before. The walls sloped inward like the building was bracing for something. Halfway down, a light flickered. A handprint appeared on the glass panel beside him. Too high for a child. Too low for an adult. He didn't turn. He just walked faster. The room at the end was new. Not built, but revealed. The floor was checkered, as if expecting games. In the center sat a tape recorder, the same model he'd used 20 years ago. On top of it, another burnt photo. Pressed play, nothing but static. Then the voice, "Don't let him forget. Or it comes again." His own voice, younger, scared, a whisper. The lights all died at once. In the dark, he heard the drawer open again. He ran through the wrong hallway. Past the mirror again, now showing 3 versions of him, all aging in reverse. Past the shoe. Past the door that hadn't been opened before. He reached the entry. It was sealed. Behind him, footsteps. He pressed his badge to the exit reader. The light blinked red. He tried again. Red. He looked at the badge. The name had vanished. The photograph now showed the counselor. The one from 1993, smiling, but not at the camera. Simon dropped it. Turned. The mirror was at the end of the hall again. He walked toward it. This time, it reflected a campfire, a drawer closing, a child humming a hymn that didn't exist. He reached out to touch it. The glass was cold, but inside, a figure looked back with his face, mouth torn by smiles that weren't his. Then came the scream. Not from the tape. Not from memory. From now. The last thing he saw was the shoe. It had moved. Pointed at the wall, where someone had scratched. Counselor never returned from second visit. He had only come back for the key. It wasn't supposed to open anything. It was ceremonial, a rusted triangle stamped with the camp's original emblem, the one they stopped using after 1983, the year the tower burned. The year the voices stopped mid-prayer. He found it in his father's old toolbox, wrapped in a hymn torn from the chapel book. Now the hour of silence comes, folded 4 times. Stained with something dark. The forest hadn't changed. That was the first mistake. There should have been rot, vines, development, but the trail past tree 19 was still clear. The moss still stopped exactly 3 feet before the stone marker with the cross carved into it. He hadn't told anyone. You didn't tell people when your childhood had teeth. And now he was standing at the edge of where the tower had been. There was nothing. Just the flattened grass, pressed as if something had lain there heavy and unseen. But the bell was still ringing. He heard it at 2:14, sharp, metallic. It echoed through no tower, through no air. Just ... arrived, like it had always been mid-ring, the same time as the fire. The same time as the last photo. He opened his hand. The key was gone. He didn't drop it. He didn't feel it move. His hand had just changed its mind. Behind him, the chapel door cracked open. It shouldn't exist. They tore it down after the second investigation, the one that claimed no record survived. But the wood was real. Old pine, charred in corners. A hairline crack ran across the stained glass, catching the sun in a way that made the Virgin weep upwards. He stepped in. The inside was wrong. The pews were too close, like they'd been pushed forward in a rush. The pulpit was scorched, but untouched by dust. And on the wall where the hymn numbers used to go, there were photographs, burned on the edges. Faces missing, shoes arranged below them, small ones. Left, not right. The child's shoe on the second row was familiar. He remembered tying that laces for Adam, the boy who went missing the day the clocks jammed. Each photo was pinned with a nail that didn't puncture, just held. He backed away and bumped a drawer. There. Hadn't been a drawer there. It opened itself, not fast, not with creak or flare. Just opened, like it had always been ajar. Inside was a mirror. It didn't show him, it showed the room. But the room in the mirror had no shoes, no photos, no pulpit. Just chairs, all full, children sitting, staring forward. One of them turned. It was him, but younger. Burn mark on the wolf neck. Right hand twitching like it always did when he was told to lie. He closed the drawer. The sound of breathing fogged the glass above the altar, but he wasn't breathing. He stepped outside. The sun hadn't moved. The clouds were wrong, repeating themselves like a skipped tape. And tree 19 cracked open. It didn't fall. It didn't split. It just unwrapped. Inside was a photograph, new, glossy. It showed the chapel. Today. Just now. From above. He was in the frame. Smiling. He hadn't smiled. He turned the photo. On the back, his name, spelled backward. The echo started again. 2:14. The bell rang. He ran, but the forest was too quiet. No twigs cracked. No insects murmured. Even his feet felt recorded, like playback, not movement. And then he saw it. The basement hatch. Had ever been here. Camp blueprints proved it. But now it was open, barely, with red clay under the hinges. The kind that stains permanent. He descended. The steps were shallow, too shallow, each one repeated. He passed the same spider 3 times. Same broken bulb. At the bottom, there was light. From a single bulb swinging, though there was no cord. A desk. Institutional metal. Covered in files. He opened one. Redacted. Name. Incident. Outcome. REINTGRATED. Next file. Name. Henry Adams. Photo attached. Smiling boy. Burn mark on neck. Status. Removed due to RPLISAID. Next file. Name. H.I.'s own. But his photo was old. Not a boy, not current. Somewhere in between. Wearing a camp counselor badge. Dated June 17, 1983. He was 7 in 1983. The drawer in the file cabinet moved. Inside, the mirror. This time it reflected a year. 23-1. He whispered. That hasn't happened. The mirror whispered back. Tomorrow never did. The drawer slammed shut. He turned. The children were there. All of them, silent, smiling like they knew. What came next? They opened their mouths in unison. No sound. Just ash. It floated toward him, covering his arms, his chest, his mouth. He couldn't breathe, but he was still whispering. He stepped backward, tripped, and fell against a door that hadn't been there. It opened onto light. Camp sunlight. Tree 19. He was outside again. Except the chapel was gone. Except the tower was standing. Except the children were lining up. And the clock read 2:14. Again. He moved forward, waving his arms, screaming for them to stop. But no one saw him. He walked through them. A girl passed straight through. His ribs. He wasn't there. Or he was still inside. The bell rang. His smile hurt. Hand touched his shoulder. He turned. No one, just a camera, set on a tripod. Pointed directly at him. The shutter clicked. Later, someone would find the photo. Dated today. Marked from a surveillance archive that had supposedly burned. He was in it. Standing beside tree 19. Smiling. He had never been there. The clock struck. 2:14 again. And the bell never stopped ringing. The lights in the basement were not supposed to hum. But tonight they did. Ben stood at the bottom step, his hand still on the rusted rail, listening. A thick, fluorescent hum, like old glass vibrating under breath. The bulb overhead pulsed once, then again, then held. There were no plans for a basement. In the camp's original blueprints, he'd checked, twice. He'd called the county even. No records. No permits. But here it was under Lodge B, behind a locked pantry door they had never opened because the key didn't exist. He found it in a hymnal, tucked between two pages that weren't meant to touch. The song was half torn, its title redacted in charcoal. A child had underlined one line in red pencil. Asterisk, we only sleep for 43. The basement door had opened before he turned the key. Now, as he stepped into the room's cement walls, dust-slick floor, copper pipes that whispered, it felt like the kind of place you weren't supposed to wake up in. It didn't have cold. It had absence. He passed a mirror leaning against the far wall. Not dusty, recently cleaned. But it showed him holding something he hadn't picked up yet. A photo burned at the edges. He glanced at his own hands, empty, then back. The photo was still there, inside the reflection, smoldering faintly in a corner, like it had just been pulled from flame. Behind him, something scraped. He didn't turn. Not right away. There was a drawer in the concrete. A drawer with no handle. No slide, just a seam that hadn't been there moments before. It cracked open with a low, wet breath. And inside, a child's shoe. Not dusty. Recently placed. Size too small for any of the campers this year. Laces knotted in the way children do when they're afraid to untie them. He touched it, and something whispered his name, not from the room, but from beneath it. Ben. It wasn't his mother's voice, or his father's. It was his own, from a year he hadn't reached yet. He turned the shoe over. Scratched into the sole, property of Echo Zero. He didn't remember writing that. But the writing remembered him. Back upstairs, the others were still asleep. Or pretending to be. Ben walked past the counselor cabins, past the old registration shed with the yellowing tape still wrapped around its chimney. The last time someone tried to tear it off, they dislocated a finger. The chimney kept things in. He stopped at the fire pit. It had been cold for weeks. No one had touched it. But tonight, embers. Low orange cracks, no wood in sight, just coals. That shouldn't breathe. He sat on the stump. The one the girl used to draw from, the scout who never blinked. She'd always drawn the same thing, a map. The woods, the cabins, the lake, and a new street. One that hadn't existed until this year. His street. Ben pulled the burnt photo from his coat. He didn't remember picking it up, but his pocket had. It showed him and another boy in the woods, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling. Same haircut, same shirt. Same name on the tag. Only one of them had a shadow. He flipped it over. In the corner, faint and water-warped, Camp Echo Zero, year. TBA, that wasn't a year. That was a placeholder, and someone had circled it. The fire cracked. He looked up. Across the pit, a boy sat. Same haircut, same coat, same tag. Ben didn't speak. The boy raised one hand, slowly. His fingernails were burned black. His smile was not kind. You were supposed to forget. The boy whispered. And Ben remembered nothing. It came in bursts after that. Handprint on the dorm window that vanished before breath could fog. It. The mirror in the washroom showing snow when it was summer. The hymn taped to his bunk. Circled now in black ink. 43 is not a number, it's a loop. The camp ledger had 17 pages missing. All from years that weren't consecutive. Each torn out at the exact same corner. Each replaced with a photograph, the same photo, over and over. 2 boys. 1 shadow, every copy more burned than the last. The others began forgetting. Names first. Then cabin numbers. Then why the lake never made a sound when you screamed into it. He tried to warn the staff. He wrote it all down. Dates, places, voices, maps. He left it in the counselor's mailbox. The next morning, his bunk was empty, not just his things. The whole bunk. Wood gone, mattress gone, floorboards redone like it had never been there. But when he returned to the basement, the drawer had 2 shoes. One laced, one unlaced, and a new page in the hymnal. When the mirror forgets, the camp remembers. He found the tape recorder on the last day, tucked in the chimney, black reel. No label. It clicked once when he pressed play. Then again slower. First came breathing, then a phrase, looped and low. Tell them, tell them, tell them before the ground resets. The last voice on the tape was his, but older, hoarse. It's already too late. Ben sat at the fire pit again. He was older now. The camp had been closed for years, but someone rebuilt it. The name changed, the cabins moved. But the fire never went out. He held the new map in his hand, charcoal on aged paper. Familiar loops, familiar trees. And at the bottom, a new detail. Street. The line circled back. He turned over the map. His name was crossed out, then rewritten. Over and over. He didn't remember drawing it. But his hand fit the charcoal. He looked up. The boy sat across from him again, smiling. You were supposed to forget, the boy whispered. Ben opened his mouth. But the wind spoke first. It said the hymn. It said the number. It said again, the screen flickers. A new charcoal map loads. Your street is on it now.